Welcome to the Beyond the Music podcast. I'm Brian. This is Ian. Say hi, Ian.
Hey there.
In the coming episodes, we'll be breaking down different original soundtracks in movies and video games. Stuff like the music theory in the score, how themes are implemented, and production qualities are just a few of the topics we'll dissect. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Pixar's Up and The Incredibles, going over various topics like how themes are used, unique aspects of the score, and then comparing them against some of Pixar's other movies. Our first topic is about the main theme. Ian, tell me a little bit about the main theme in The Incredibles.
Well, anyone that's seen the movie knows that the score itself stands out from a lot of others. It has that heavy brass sort of big band setup, and it's really the only thing similar to it would be something like James Bond and such. But yeah, it's definitely unique from a lot of other films you hear, because originally, like even in documentaries with Michael Giacchino and such, they're talking about how they went about creating it, and they wanted to. The whole movie was supposed to be this view of the future from like the 60s, like what they would think it would be like. And so like it's sort of based in reality, but it's not. And they thought that this type of big band brass sort of music kind of matched that sort of overall feel that the movie was trying to put out.
I like that because the game Fallout did that, where it's the future, but it's the past, and there's this retro sound to the soundtrack. And like you said, The Incredibles did it, and it's very effective because it's familiar but different, and I think that works really well.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. The movie itself is just fun to watch. Even with The Incredibles 2 that recently came out, it was kind of funny because they all had like corded phones.
Yeah.
And such like that, but it was kind of futuristic. It was
that one was like the 70s where it's coming into the future, but not quite there.
Right. But yeah, I think the score itself did a good job of reflecting that and giving the movie itself a unique sort of feel, especially with it being somewhat generic in a way, right? With it being like, just like a superhero movie.
Right.
In essence, it was obviously different, but yeah, I think it matches it and makes it stand out.
Yeah, I would say in Up is Giacchino took a completely different approach to this. He based the whole soundtrack really around one chord, the F major 7 chord. And that chord works because it personifies what Carl is going through, because a major 7 chord is both a major chord and a minor chord put together. I remember when we were in theory and we had to do harmonic dictation where the teacher would play a chord and you have to figure out what it is. The major 7 would always get me because I'd hear a minor chord in it and be like, oh, that's the minor 7 chord, but it's not. I was hearing the minor triad in the major 7, and I think it's very effective in Up. Because Carl goes through a wide range of emotions. He's so happy with Ellie in the beginning of the movie, and then he's sad when she passes away. And that major 7 chord is the foundation of the movie. And it just represents Carl so well. I don't think there could be really any other way to write that better than Giacchino wrote it in that.
Yeah, it's definitely an effective score, and just that idea is such a unique sound, and that he based everything around that theme is all based around that chord itself, especially with those like preconceived or kind of way people have been conditioned to understand music, that minor's sad and major's happy. Yeah, it is very, very effective use of that chord.
He does there's other things too where Ellie and Carl have a foundation in color that they use in the movie. When Ellie's on screen, there's different shades of pinks and purples that Carl sees in his life. And in married life, you see that there's a lot of pinks that use, and when she passes away, they start to desaturate the color. Mm-hmm. Carl starts wearing more bland clothing. When he wakes up in the morning, there'll be light shining through, and it's shining in a little pink on her side of the bed or where she sits for breakfast. And married life, especially the cue in the beginning, it's the 5-minute intro that goes through their life. The Ellie's theme starts when Ellie, the character, says, "We're in a club now," and the waltz theme kicks in. And Giacchino does this thing where when the characters hear a sad news, it does not go to a minor key. It stays on the major 7 chord, where another composer might be inclined to say, this is a sad scene, let's use a sad chord here. He doesn't do that. He keeps it, and it plays on the effectiveness of if something is sad, you make it a happy score underneath, and it makes it more effective than necessarily having a sad sound with a sad scene. Did you find any interesting aspects of that in The Incredibles where he would do that?
Well, in The Incredibles, as far as the music changing up, it was actually pretty consistent throughout the whole movie. There wasn't a whole lot of changes in the style or sound. Really, the biggest difference is you'd see a stark contrast between the brass-heavy main themes you'd hear during most of the action scenes, but there was also a lot of stealth sort of scenes, and especially in the first movie. You think of Mr. Incredible when he was sneaking around at like 2 a.m. or whatever, and then when Mrs. Incredible comes to try to save him and such. A lot of the scenes during that whole section were very string-heavy, and it kind of created a big contrast between the two of them.
Well, I noticed, I think Married Life is the greatest musical cue in, I'd say, the past 10, 15 years, strictly because there's no dialogue in that. The music has to be perfect. You have to convey the emotion of their love and care for each other with no character dialogue. So it's all on the composer to make something memorable in 5 minutes. How many people, I've talked to a lot of friends and people online where you're crying at the end of that. It's 5 minutes into the movie and the music gets you to care for these characters even though you don't necessarily know them, and yet you've seen their whole life play out in just a few minutes. I think that is a testament to writing a good melody and theme if you can strike that emotional impact within just a few minutes.
It's really difficult to do that. There's not many movies or anything where within a short amount of time they can actually, you'll see some movies that'll try to convince you of some sort of love story for like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And it never really,
yeah.
It never really gets
you're
through.
at the end of the movie and just like, I don't really care about these characters.
But yeah, in 5 minutes he managed to do that with the music. It is really, it's crazy how big of a difference the music itself can make. And there really wasn't a whole lot of, the score in Incredibles was there more so to kind of make it more exciting and kind of feed that fire. It didn't seem, there wasn't a whole lot of, there was emotional scenes in the movie, of course, but it wasn't necessarily the main drive of the movie. So they're very different soundtracks in a lot of ways, but I think they both serve their respective movies very well.
I would agree in that Ellie's theme almost takes on a life of its own throughout the movie, how it repeats. And that is a star of the movie where, like you say, The Incredibles, it's more of a supplementary score to underlie the action, not necessarily to bring out an emotion.
But like I was saying before, it is very unique in its sound in general. Not many movies are scored, in that style. So I think it stands out. It kind of, it's like a more general support of the movie, right. Whereas, with Up, the music was very intimate in how it supported the movie. It's a little bit different styles, really.
And you mentioned the uniqueness, and Up has, and Ellie's theme in particular, has a uniqueness in that it's 6/8, and it's a very apparent waltz 6/8. Lots of film scores use compound meter or odd time signatures, but not in your face like a 6/8 waltz right at the beginning of the movie. It's more masked in some of the other instruments. And this is like, nope, this is a waltz. And it's very refreshing to hear that in a score. And that was what stood out to me. And I like that in both movies. He uses a unique take on a score where somebody else might not see it like that. And it's very effective in both movies. Right.
Yeah, I agree. Like even with the recording style of things, which we'll talk about more in a bit, but he used a lot of, like, he even used muted trumpets and such. It was very, like whole sections with muted trumpets. They were very, very different from most conventional film scoring.
Yeah, and there's muted trumpets in here as well. But it sounds like it's, the way they recorded it, like you said, we'll get to later, but as if it's off in the distance through an old radio.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you that evocative feel of the 1920s, even though the movie doesn't outwardly say where it takes place, mm-hmm. because it has modern in the beginning. There's a big city, but it still has that old timey feel, and
right.
and it's very effective, and it sticks with you after you listen to it.
Now that we've gone over the main themes, let's transition and talk about some of the other character themes and other scenes throughout the movie where there was like a unique section where there was some particular underscoring we'd like to talk about, something that we felt really supported the story well. Do you have any of those from Up?
Yeah, so when they finally get to South America, they meet Kevin, the giant bird, and it's subtle because it's not necessarily a main theme, but it's Giacchino uses Latin rhythms and instrumentation. He does it where there'll be strings playing, but then the percussion underneath will use Latin rhythms, and it's a subtle way to ground the audience in where they are location wise without beating it over your head like, hey, we're in South America, here's a bossa nova tune or something. It's very effective to mix a traditional score with more modern elements of music and genres from the location that you're in.
Right. So it was just a rhythmic sort of motif that they played for the bird. Did he mix I hadn't paid that much attention. Did he mix like another theme over top of that rhythm?
Not necessarily. It wasn't, Ellie's theme didn't play underneath or anything, or Muntz's theme.
Right.
It was more, some parts of scores are just there to be background. It's not necessarily meant to be, this is a theme. Mm-hmm. This is one of those times where there's character dialogue, talking, and there's stuff on screen to capture the audience, and this is more just a background. It's
kind of set the mood.
Yeah, it's just a subconscious thing to where we're like, oh, this reinforces that we're in South America.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, in The Incredibles, the themes mixed really well. Some of the other themes that you would hear throughout the movie. One of those main parts being in a rush hour, and we've talked about this cue a few times. When and this during this scene, if you can imagine this in the movie, is when right when Mr. Incredible jumps through the window and like saves the guy that was trying to jump off the building, and then Bon Voyage like blows a hole in the wall. And it's so funny because there's this little like accordion sort of motif that plays when he walks through.
I remember watching that the first time. I was like, that is so good.
It's really clever and really funny.
It's like a step away from being cheesy, but it's so brilliant.
I know. It's kind of, it stands out, but it's also subtle in its own way. He's such a funny character anyways, and it's just so,
the name even
it's
bon
so
Voyage
random,
makes me laugh.
But during that same scene is when you see Young Syndrome, right? And you actually hear his theme introduced during Rush Hour. And it's really interesting because later in the movie, his theme comes back when when he's an adult, and it's way more sinister than it was before. So it's really clever how Giacchino used these, secondary themes and kind of mixed them in at different areas and then reintroduced them, but in kind of a new light.
He did the same thing with the Muntz character in Up, where in the beginning, Carl is watching a newsreel of Muntz, and the newsreel is played on an old record player, and it's got the undulations in the melody, and it's a very fun theme when you hear it in that style. And then as you progress in the movie and you discover that he is bad, you get this. The theme is the same, but just the way it's played with the strings and
it kind of becomes more sinister.
Yeah, the deep strings and cellos, and it just has a different effect on the theme. And I like that he uses that style in both of these movies in different ways to different effects, but it's very, very well written.
Right, yeah, and it definitely does a good job of supporting the story and such. Because, if you think about that one scene when the main character in Up, when he first kind of realizes that he's with the bad guy, who he thought was this amazing, adventurer, it kind of follows how he's feeling and how he understands the situation. Because, you get that, like, kind of feeling in your gut. It kind of simulates, what am I trying to say? It kind of recreates that in a way, right? So it's like you're feeling his emotions as they happen. So, yeah.
There was one thing, I'm sure it was intentional because he's a brilliant composer. With Kevin, he's a giant bird, and there's an element of slapstick comedy to how he's portrayed on screen. He's goofy, and he just causes mayhem. And so Giacchino uses this thing of rising diminished chords. Diminished chords you can play in minor thirds, and it's the same chord. It's just
the 4 diminished 7.
Right, exactly.
The cyclical chord.
And Looney Tunes and old cartoons did that all the time, where they would play rising diminished chords really fast, and you get this really interesting sound. And you would think because it's a diminished chord that it would be intense or angry, but it gives it a cartoony feel, and
right.
He uses that again, it's a subtle element, but
especially for someone who watched a bunch of cartoons.
Yeah.
You know, when they were younger, it would kind of be something that subconsciously you've picked up on as being, oh, hey, this is a cute little funny thing.
You know, you'd see Bugs Bunny and he'd be in danger. You know, a bomb's going to drop on his head or a rock, but it play that diminished chord motif, and you would know nothing necessarily bad is going to happen to him.
Right, but it kind of made it.
Yeah.
That's funny. I didn't notice that either.
Yeah.
Man, you got a lot more out of this movie than I did as far as analyzing it. Yeah, that's so clever. And that's a really good use of kind of underscoring that bird, because like you said, he is such a slapstick sort of. Yeah, that's funny. I'm gonna keep that in mind.
That's one of my favorite tricks, is that diminished chord, is how it can be built upon itself, because you can change keys so easily, and using that, you can go anywhere in a score with that rising diminished, and he does that where it'll be real brief and then it transitions into something else, because that chord is so versatile and where it can go and what it sets up, and there's an absence of a key when you hear it, and then it goes back into the score and it feels regular again. But just little touches like that is very clever.
Yeah, there was a couple of little scenes in Incredibles too that I really liked. That one scene, well, this is right after when Mr. Incredible first finds Syndrome's, you know, this bad guy that's running this island. When he throws him way back up into the air and he lands in the water and he's running away from him, he kind of goes up into that cave and sees Laserbeam, I believe was his name.
Gazerbeam?
Gazerbeam. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My bad.
It might be Laser. I thought it was.
No, you're right. That's what it is. I was wrong. During that scene, there's kind of like a jump scare. And that's not something Michael Giacchino does a whole lot in his films. But good grief, I was a good bit younger when I watched that movie for the first time, and it scared me half to death the first time I saw that. It was just such a abrupt moment in the score, and I really liked that. It's another one of those examples of just little things that you don't really.
Yeah, that's a horror element to where you'd see that all the time, where a character's in an old attic with just a little flashlight, and they use that in the movie where he doesn't have any. Mr. Incredible in the cave doesn't have a light source, but he does. It's the security camera beam that's searching around, so there's minimal light, and it's got this element to where you're scared, even though it's this family-friendly movie. Just like in Up, where he uses maybe an old cartoon style song, and it's this mixture of other genres that can be very effective, even if your movie is a kid's movie.
Right. I think it just makes the whole experience a little bit more interesting, because in the context of a horror movie, a jump scare is considered a cliche and almost kind of not creative in a way. But in this case, it was, because it just kind of jumped out of nowhere. And then same, like if it was a cartoon, like a slapstick sort of Tom and Jerry kind of thing, or Looney Tunes, you know, that using that sort of diminished scale would be a cliche. But using it in this other aspect kind of references something different. It's really clever.
Yeah, when you use stuff out of the genre, it's more of an homage rather than a cliche, and it's very effective in many cases, as these two made very clear. Now we're on to our third topic, and we'll be going over some of the unique, subtle aspects of the score. This topic will be not necessarily about themes in general, but just different aspects of the score overall that we thought stood out. Were there anything that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, in the production side of things, they recorded with a full ensemble in the room, and I think that helped the score itself a lot. You know, it's like a unique aspect of it. Not everyone. Sometimes they record sectionals, or some of it will be electronic. It just depends on the film. Not that it's uncommon. But I think that added it did add a whole lot of energy to it, especially with the brass players being up front, having everyone playing in the same room. Everyone was kind of feeding off of each other's energy. And I think that's another thing that made that particular score stand out.
Yeah, I would say in many scores, you could get away with not having all the players in the same room. In a brass, you got to have all the players for it to sound authentic. I saw some of the behind the scenes for the video game Cuphead, and they had all their brass players all in the same room playing at the same time with a conductor. It doesn't sound like you would, but you can feel that in the score. Incredibles 2 was like that. Incredibles, you feel the energy somehow. You're not seeing the players, it's recorded, but it's just so effective rather than, doing trumpets one day, trombones the other day and mixing it together. just something about them all being together.
Feels more like a live kind of sound, anyways. And it's not. Yeah, I think it stood out a lot. Made it unique.
There's some stuff in Up where they take away music rather than adding to it. In the beginning of the film, after Ellie passes away, the next scene is with Carl in his house, and they strip away all the music. He's dealing with the construction company because they want to buy his house. They want to demolish it and put up a mall or whatever it is. And there's no music during that scene. And it amplifies the effect of Carl's sadness. I mentioned earlier about the color, where they take away the color. He's very desaturated, his clothes are just gray and brown. And so when there's no music, you don't watch the movie and go, hey, there's no music playing. You subtly and subconsciously pick up on that. You just hear the cars in the street and the construction sounds and the people talking. And the music only returns when Russell shows up. That tells you that he needs people in his life to make him whole again. And taking away music is just as effective as, a fancy theme or something. And the sound engineers and the people who worked on the movie did a fantastic job with that.
That's true. There's a lot that can be said for taking music away. One of the topics I'd like to talk about in the future is a video game, The Last of Us. It does that a lot too. It uses a lot of silence, and rather than the main, there's not necessarily a theme for the main character, but rather it's defined by the people he's around and the relationships he has. So yeah, that's not used a whole lot in scoring, but I think it's very effective when it is.
It'd be so easy for a composer to say, his wife just passed away, we need music here. But to show that restraint is even more effective. He could have said, oh, well, I'll take Ellie's theme and play it in a minor key or use, some borrowed chord to change it. But he didn't. They just stripped away all the sound, and it made the movie better for it. Now, I had some stuff with, you talked about production, where they would take themes and mess with it. So in Up, near the end, the final battle, they have Muntz's theme. Muntz and Carl are fighting, and they're doing the geriatric where they're hitting each other with their walkers and all that.
Yeah, throwing their backs out and such.
Exactly. So they're playing Muntz's theme in this museum, only they played it through a phonograph and then turned the reverb way up. So it sounds like it's playing over the loudspeakers overhead. And when they finally start fighting, they mix the themes. So Ellie's theme is playing and Muntz's theme is playing. And I believe that's the only time you hear Ellie's theme in a minor key. And they change it. I mentioned earlier how it's in 6/8. This time it's in 4/4. Mm-hmm. So it's familiar, but you can tell something is...
It's kind of being forced into that situation.
Exactly. Yeah. You can tell he's in danger because there's the theme again, but something I can't tell.
It's not quite right.
I can't follow along with it the same way. Stuff like that is just very effective production-wise to say, oh, we'll play the themes, but in a different way to have it as background noise.
Right. Yeah, one of the neat things they did, another thing they did production-wise in Incredibles was they doubled a lot of strange instruments. I suppose they weren't too strange, but they already had some interesting percussion instruments in there, and piano was doubling certain instruments that it normally wouldn't and such. It adds to it, especially at high points in the film. For The Incredibles, this was definitely during that last fight, same as. Yeah, it seems like it's a good idea to, once you get towards the end of a film like that, to start throwing in some creative new things to mix up with what you've been hearing throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, it's a way to say you've remembered this, and then when you bring it back, it's even more effective because you've heard the change and how it's differentiated between when you first heard it in the beginning of the movie. All right, for our final topic, we're going to discuss where these movies rank among Giacchino's other Pixar soundtracks. All right, Ian, here are the candidates. Ratatouille.
All right, so we were saying better than Up, not better than Up.
Is it better than Incredibles?
Yes, I think so. But just by a little bit, but yes.
That is a fantastic soundtrack.
It is. It's such, I love it. It has such a romantic feel, and it kind of just feeds on what your imagination of Paris is.
Yeah. So. There's even Latin style chord progressions in it, and there's percussion, and it's just brilliant.
It's good. We'll have to do a podcast on it.
We will. Cars 2.
No one watched that really.
I saw Cars 2. I did not enjoy it.
Yeah, I don't even know what the music sounds like in it. So we're just gonna move on.
All right, Coco.
That's a tough one. Like you were saying, I actually liked Coco, but you were saying that some of the storytelling tropes were kind of predictable in a way.
Yeah, just the idea of there's a kid and he wants to do this thing and his family doesn't want him to do it,
Right.
but he's going to do it, and then at the end the family was like, yeah, you can do it.
Yeah, I guess it's a big. I mean, I thought it was cute, but I really loved the music because, like you know, I started on classical guitar. Not that it's, but you know, it's closer to that style and such. So I enjoyed the soundtrack a whole lot. I don't know about whether or not it underscored it better than Up or The Incredibles. I'd have to really listen to it again and break it down. I feel like Up is one of the better ones as far as underscoring what's actually happening on the screen. I would say maybe it didn't underscore it better than Incredibles. But Incredibles is definitely more unique than Coco, I think.
So, as we discussed, I am not the biggest fan of Coco. I do think this might be some of his best work. It might not be my favorite film, but that soundtrack is so good. The way the guitars play, like you said, the classical elements, it just fits together really well with everything else. All right, Incredibles 2.
Compared to Incredibles 1?
Yes.
I think Incredibles 1 I liked better. Everything seemed more raw and original with that one. But the second one had a lot of fun themes in it as well. But yeah, I think I like the first one.
It's a little more lounge jazzy. The
Yeah.
Incredibles 2, and it's got some stand-up bass, which I found interesting. But you're right. Hearing Incredibles 1 the first time is whoa.
Yeah.
All right, Inside Out.
Well, I haven't seen this movie, actually, so I'm going to throw this one back to you. How do you feel about it?
So, Inside Out, you should see it because
I will.
It will make you think about yourself and how you deal with stuff. You got to be prepared to watch this. But anyway, with the soundtrack, there was a movie that came out. It was called I Heart Huckabees. I don't know if you ever seen it or heard of it. Quietly, one of my favorite soundtracks. It's by John Bryan. And it's a very folksy sound. It has a lot of acoustic guitars and subtle percussion and bells and alternative percussion. And Inside Out reminds me a lot of I Heart Huckabees, and that's a good thing. Inside Out is very good. It supplements the movie very well. I would say it's not as good as Ratatouille, but it's right up there with some of his best work.
All right, we're going to go ahead and do a recap here, and this is where we're actually going to go ahead and pit the movies against each other and do like a versus and say who is the best out of these different categories. Right, okay. So the first category is production. So which movie, Brian, do you think had better production quality?
I got to say Incredibles has better production.
That's what I would say too.
Yeah. It's because they recorded it all together. Had they not been, I would have said Up is better.
Yeah, Up has good production too, and they had like a lot of neat tricks in it, like you were saying. They were running it through an old
newsreel.
Yeah, newsreel. That's what it was. Yeah, there's lots of clever things they did that has like some high production in it, but I think overall, Incredibles was a very big project and probably wins in that category. All right.
Agree.
So secondary themes and other underscoring elements and such. Which one do you think was better?
I think the secondary themes and music in The Incredibles is better.
Really?
I do.
That's kind of funny because I think Up had better ones.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
It's more of because, there's the main theme. Ba-da-ba-ba-da.
Right.
That I don't think those pitches were correct.
That's close enough.
Yeah, right. You get the idea.
Yeah.
But when he's working out and his love life is coming back, that cue is called.
It is called Life's Incredible again.
Exactly. That themes like that stuck with me better than the secondary themes in Up.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that one cue did stick with me. But I think that the effectiveness of the secondary cues as far as supporting the story were probably better in Up. But anyways, these are rapid fire. So we're moving on. Okay, who had the better main theme?
Oh, it's Married Life.
Yeah, it's Up. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we settled that. Now here we go. This is the big question. Which soundtrack overall was better? Ready? Let's answer on 3. 1, 2, 3. Up.
Incredibles.
Dang it.
Here's the thing. Ellie's theme is my favorite theme. It's top 5.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the score is as unique as Incredibles is for The Incredibles. So I look at it, if you switched the themes, The Incredibles could absolutely work for Up. It's so versatile in how it's portrayed, where Up is very, I guess it's almost a compliment that it's written for the movie.
Right, it's tied to it seems.
I just think Incredibles has that energy.
So we're going to go ahead and move on to the outro. We have a
Real quick.
Oh, okay.
I just want to point out that we just spent 32 minutes breaking down, and we picked each other's movies. There's a delicious irony in that somewhere, I'm sure. But that's for another day.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and end this podcast here. We have, both Brian and I have YouTube channels. Brian's is more established currently. So if you were looking for some theory videos that are really quick to the point and very well explained, you can go check out Brian's channel. What is it?
Orchestra Studio, and that's Orca, O-R-C-A, like the killer whale.
Very good. And
O-R-C-A-S... Hey, I'm
sorry.
O-R-C-A-S-T-R-A Studio.
Cool. And my channel is just Ian O'Donnell. You can find some videos on theory there and some breaking down movie and video game themes as well. All right, so what's a little teaser for next week's episode?
Next week, you mentioned Naughty Dog. We're getting deep into Naughty Dog. That sounds terrible. With...
oh my gosh.
with Uncharted.
Yeah.
2 and 3.
Right.
I'm taking 3.
You're taking
2. Spoiler, it's probably going to be 2. But check it out anyway, because it's going to be a good one. Thanks for listening.